Golden morning light sliced through Millbrook High's faculty lounge windows. Dr. Elena Martinez swept into the room, charcoal blazer tailored to perfection, Louboutin heels striking the scarred oak floor. Power, authority, money. A crumpled photocopy sprawled across the coffee-stained table, ancient Latin script that had defeated Harvard professors, Yale scholars, Columbia academics. Elena's manicured fingers traced the incomprehensible words. Behind her, water sloshed. The janitor moved like a ghost, his calloused hands steady on the mop handle. Marcus Thompson. Invisible, dismissed, forgotten. But when his eyes found those Latin characters, something ignited. Sharp, electric, dangerous. Sarah Chen's shrill laughter shattered the tension. "Hey, Marcus, think you can crack this mystery? Translate this and my salary is yours." The room erupted in mocking laughter from the teachers, cruel voices rising like hyenas circling prey. Marcus stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The laughter died slowly, like air leaking from a punctured balloon. Marcus set down his mop with deliberate precision, the metal handle clicking against the wall. His work boots made no sound as he approached the table, 38 years of quiet dignity in every measured step. Elena found herself holding her breath, studying the man she had dismissed moments earlier. The weathered flannel shirt, the silver threading through dark hair, the hands that spoke of honest labor. Something about his posture had shifted, straightened, as if invisible weights had been lifted from his shoulders. Principal Murphy cleared his throat, the sound awkward in the sudden silence. "Marcus, you don't have to." But Marcus was already reaching for the manuscript, his fingers hovering over the ancient text with the reverence of someone handling sacred relics. Elena watched his eyes move across the Latin words, not stumbling or searching, but reading with fluid comprehension. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't a janitor pretending to understand. This was someone coming home. Marcus began to speak, his voice low and rich with unexpected authority. "This appears to be a commentary on Book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid, specifically the passage where Anchises reveals Rome's destiny to his son." His pronunciation was flawless, each Latin syllable rolling off his tongue like honey. The handwriting suggests late 18th century, possibly colonial era. "See here?" He pointed to a faded annotation. "The scholar questions Virgil's use of the subjunctive mood in line 453. Sarah Chen's face had gone pale. Elena felt the world tilt on its axis. "The interesting part," Marcus continued, his finger tracing the margins where spidery notes danced between lines, "is how this anonymous scholar connects Virgil's prophecy to American exceptionalism. He's arguing that the New World fulfills Anchises' vision of an empire without end." His voice carried the weight of deep understanding, years of study condensed into moments of revelation. It's actually quite brilliant work. Whoever wrote this understood both classical philology and political philosophy. The room had become a cathedral of shocked silence, every breath suspended in disbelief. Elena's mind raced, fragments of memory clicking into place like puzzle pieces. She had read this type of analysis before, this exact scholarly approach to Virgilian prophecy. Her hands trembled slightly as she remembered a paper that had changed her perspective on classical literature during graduate school. "The author," she whispered, barely audible, "signed his initials M.T." Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes with a mixture of resignation and relief. For a moment time stopped, and Elena saw past the janitor's uniform to something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. The faculty lounge erupted into chaos. Teachers peppered Marcus with questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and curiosity. Sarah Chen sat down hard, her face crimson with embarrassment. Principal Murphy stood slack-jawed, staring at his janitor as if seeing him for the first time. But Elena heard none of it, her attention fixed on Marcus's hands as he gently returned the manuscript to the table. Those hands, she had been wrong about them. They weren't just weathered from manual labor. They bore the particular calluses of someone who had spent countless hours gripping pens, turning pages, lost in worlds of scholarship and thought. Marcus straightened slowly, the weight of exposure settling on his shoulders like an old coat. "If you'll excuse me," he said quietly, "I have floors to finish." He turned toward his forgotten mop, but Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the babble of amazed colleagues. "Wait." Her Louboutins clicked against the floor as she moved closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know your work. Your analysis of prophetic voices in classical literature. You're the M. Thompson who wrote about Virgilian destiny and American identity." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. For 3 years, Marcus Thompson had been invisible in Millbrook, the quiet janitor who arrived early, worked efficiently, and disappeared into the background of busy lives. He lived in a modest ranch house on Elm Street with 8-year-old Emma, their world contained within routines of school runs, bedtime stories, and weekend trips to the library. The townspeople knew him as the widower who had lost his wife Sarah to cancer 4 years ago, the devoted father who never missed a parent-teacher conference or soccer game. They saw determination and kindness, but never suspected the mind that had once been groomed for academic greatness. What they could not see was the leather briefcase hidden in his bedroom closet, filled with unfinished research and abandoned dreams. Inside lay the remnants of a doctoral dissertation that would have earned him recognition in classical studies, pages that had been set aside when Sarah's illness demanded his complete attention. Harvard's doctoral program in classical philology had been his world once. Seminars on ancient texts, late-night debates about translation theory, the intoxicating pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. But when Sarah needed him, the choice had been simple. Love trumped ambition every time. Elena Martinez had arrived in Millbrook 6 weeks earlier, carrying her own wounds from Columbia University's cutthroat academic politics. A plagiarism scandal had destroyed her reputation overnight. Her colleague had stolen her research on linguistic patterns in ancient texts, then accused her of the very theft he had committed. With no way to prove her innocence, she had fled to this small Massachusetts town, hoping to rebuild her career at the community college level. Her rented condo on Maple Avenue was filled with boxes she had not yet unpacked, tangible reminders of a life she was still learning to leave behind. The irony was not lost on her that she had come here to escape academic judgment, only to find herself judging others. That morning's encounter with Marcus had shattered her assumptions about intelligence and worth, forcing her to confront her own prejudices. As she walked home that evening, her mind kept returning to the moment when recognition had flickered between them, two scholars who had chosen very different paths through the wilderness of broken dreams. The manuscript that had brought them together felt like more than coincidence. It felt like destiny knocking on her carefully constructed walls. 2 days later, Emma Thompson burst into the faculty lounge during Elena's lunch break, her unicorn backpack bouncing with 8-year-old energy. "Daddy forgot his thermos," she announced, holding up a dented metal container with obvious pride. Elena looked up from her sandwich, struck by the child's resemblance to Marcus. The same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet confidence that seemed too mature for her years. Emma studied Elena with unabashed curiosity, taking in the expensive clothes and carefully styled hair with the frank assessment only children could manage. "You're the professor who made Daddy upset yesterday," Emma said matter-of-factly, settling into a chair without invitation. Elena nearly choked on her coffee, unprepared for such directness. "He wasn't upset at you specifically," Emma continued, swinging her legs from the oversized chair. "He gets sad sometimes when people think he's not smart because of his job, but I told him you probably didn't know any better." The casual wisdom of the comment hit Elena like a physical blow, revealing the depth of pain her assumptions had caused. "Your father is very intelligent," Elena managed, setting down her cup with shaking hands. Emma nodded solemnly, as if this were the most obvious truth in the world. "He reads me stories in different languages. Greek myths are the best because he does all the voices, and he helps me with homework using big words that make me sound super smart at show and tell." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, pure and fierce in the way only a child's love could be. Elena found herself smiling despite the guilt gnawing at her chest. "What other languages does he speak?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Oh, lots! He taught me to write my name in Greek letters, and he knows French and Spanish and German. Sometimes he talks to the maintenance guys in Spanish because they get lonely for home. She leaned forward conspiratorially. And he reads Latin like it's English. Daddy says dead languages aren't really dead if someone still loves them. The simple profundity of the statement left Elena speechless, recognizing in it the voice of a true scholar passed down to the next generation. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus himself, appearing in the doorway with work gloves in hand and concern etched across his features. Emma, you can't just run off to bother. His words died when he saw Elena, the careful distance he had maintained since their confrontation evident in his posture. Emma hopped down from her chair, completely oblivious to the tension. Daddy, I brought your thermos, and Dr. Martinez was asking about your languages. I told her about the Greek stories and the Spanish guys, and that's enough, sweetheart, Marcus interrupted gently, his hand finding Emma's shoulder with practiced paternal guidance. He looked at Elena with guarded politeness, the mask of the invisible janitor sliding back into place. I apologize if she bothered you, Dr. Martinez. Emma doesn't understand boundaries yet. But Elena was shaking her head, rising from her chair with sudden urgency. She didn't bother me at all. Actually, I was hoping we could talk. About the manuscript, about your research. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, desperation bleeding through her composed facade. Marcus studied her for a long moment, weighing something behind his dark eyes. Emma looked between them with the intuitive understanding children possessed about adult emotions, sensing undercurrents she could not yet name. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly. Emma, go play on the swings for a few minutes. Stay where I can see you. As his daughter skipped away, chattering to herself about playground adventures, Marcus turned back to Elena with the full weight of his attention. What did you want to discuss, Dr. Martinez? The afternoon light streaming through the lounge windows cast long shadows across the floor as Elena gathered her courage. I've been thinking about what happened the other day, about assumptions and first impressions and how wrong they can be. She paused, watching Marcus's face for any sign of softening. I recognized your work because I cited it in my master's thesis 7 years ago. Your analysis of prophetic imagery and Virgilian epic poetry changed how I approach classical texts. The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile but real. Marcus's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, surprise flickering across his features before he could contain it. You read my work? The question carried decades of isolation, years of intellectual loneliness disguised as acceptance. Elena nodded, feeling the walls between them beginning to shift. Read it? It influenced my entire academic trajectory. Your insights about ancient prophecy connecting to modern American identity were brilliant. I always wondered why you never published more in that vein. The unspoken question lingered. What had happened to the promising scholar whose work had illuminated her own path? Outside, Emma's laughter drifted through the open windows as she conquered monkey bars with determined concentration. Marcus glanced toward his daughter, his expression softening with love so profound it made Elena's chest ache. Life had other plans, he said simply, but the weight of sacrifice colored his words. Sarah got sick just as I was finishing my dissertation. The choice between academic success and being present for my family wasn't really a choice at all. He met Elena's eyes with quiet dignity. I've never regretted it, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the work sometimes. What if, Elena began carefully, her heart racing with possibility, you didn't have to choose between them anymore? Marcus raised an eyebrow, curiosity replacing guardedness for the first time since their confrontation. Elena took a deep breath, the words spilling out in a rush of academic excitement. I'm working on a paper about educational accessibility in classical studies, how knowledge belongs to everyone, not just universities. Your perspective as someone who chose family over academia could be invaluable. We could collaborate, evenings, weekends, whenever works for you and Emma. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities and carefully guarded hopes. Through the window, Emma had discovered a caterpillar and was conducting a serious scientific examination, her small hands gentle as she observed its movement across a maple leaf. Marcus watched his daughter with the expression of a man who had learned to find the extraordinary in ordinary moments, beauty in simplicity, purpose in the small acts of daily love that built a life worth living. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Why would an accomplished professor want to work with a janitor?" But Elena heard the real question underneath. Why would someone choose to see him as more than his circumstances suggested? She thought about her own journey, the scandal that had driven her here, the loneliness of being misunderstood. "Because intelligence isn't about titles or salaries," she said quietly, "and because I think we both know what it feels like to be underestimated." Marcus considered this, his gaze shifting between Elena and Emma, weighing possibilities against protecting the fragile peace they had built. "What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" The question carried cautious interest, the first crack in armor built from years of necessary self-protection. Elena felt hope flutter in her chest like butterfly wings. "Equal partnership. Your insights, my academic connections. We could show the world that scholarship isn't confined to ivory towers, that sometimes the most profound understanding comes from those who've lived outside the system." 3 weeks later, Elena found herself sitting at Marcus's kitchen table on a Saturday evening, papers scattered between coffee cups and Emma's colored pencils. The house was modest but warm, filled with handmade artwork and photographs that spoke of a life built on love rather than luxury. Emma had claimed the corner of the table for her own project, illustrating a story about a princess who spoke to animals in their own languages, inspired by her father's linguistic abilities and her own boundless imagination. "The central thesis," Marcus was saying, his finger tracing lines of text on his laptop screen, "is that classical education shouldn't be a privilege reserved for the elite. These stories, these philosophical frameworks, they belong to anyone curious enough to embrace them." His passion was infectious, the quiet janitor transformed into the scholar he had always been beneath the surface. Elena watched him explain complex theoretical concepts with the same patience he used to help Emma with homework, recognizing a teacher's soul regardless of classroom walls. Their research had taken unexpected directions, exploring how immigrant communities used classical references to claim space in American discourse, how working-class readers found meaning in ancient texts that spoke to universal human experiences. Marcus's perspective as someone who existed between worlds, academic and blue-collar, privileged and struggling, brought depth Elena had never considered. Together, they were creating something neither could have achieved alone. Emma looked up from her drawing, a smudge of purple crayon on her cheek. "Are you guys going to be famous?" she asked with the casual confidence of someone who believed her father could accomplish anything. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances across the table, sharing a moment of amused understanding. "We're going to help people understand that learning belongs to everyone," Elena explained gently. "Even princesses who talk to animals." Emma nodded seriously, returning to her illustration with renewed purpose. The evening stretched pleasantly ahead of them, filled with the comfortable rhythm of shared work and Emma's cheerful chatter. Elena found herself studying the small details that made this house a home. Marcus's coffee mug with a chip in the handle, Emma's soccer cleats by the door, family photos where Sarah's absence was present in every carefully arranged frame. This was not the life she had planned when she entered academia, but it felt more real than anything she had known in the competitive halls of Columbia. As autumn deepened into winter, their collaboration grew into something approaching friendship. Elena began staying for dinner after their work sessions, learning to navigate Emma's strong opinions about vegetables and Marcus's patient negotiations about bedtime routines. She discovered that Marcus could cook with the same precision he brought to textual analysis, turning simple ingredients into meals that tasted like care made tangible. Emma appointed herself translator between the adult world and her own 8-year-old logic, bridging conversations with questions that cut to the heart of complex issues. One snowy evening in December, as Elena helped clear dishes while Emma practiced piano in the living room, Marcus broke their comfortable silence with unexpected words. "She likes you," he said quietly, nodding toward the music drifting from the other room. "Emma doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly." Elena felt something flutter in her chest, dangerous and wonderful. I like her too, she replied, meaning more than just the child. She's remarkable, like her father. Their eyes met across the kitchen, steam rising from the sink where Marcus washed dishes with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. For a moment, Elena allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future, not just as academic collaborators, but as something more personal and permanent. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She had come to Millbrook to escape complications, not to create new ones. But standing in this warm kitchen, listening to Emma's halting rendition of Für Elise, Elena could not bring herself to regret the complications Marcus and his daughter had brought to her carefully ordered life. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Richard Pemberton's unexpected appearance at the front door. Elena heard the doorbell through Emma's music, followed by Marcus's surprised voice, greeting someone with stiff formality. She remained in the kitchen, instinctively understanding that this was a conversation she should not witness. But Pemberton's voice carried through the house, cultured and commanding, speaking of opportunities and wasted potential with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Marcus, my boy," Pemberton was saying, his tone mixing affection with disappointment. "I've been hearing remarkable things about your recent work. Academic circles are buzzing about this collaboration with Dr. Martinez. Brilliant stuff, truly brilliant." Elena heard Emma's piano fall silent, then the soft pad of small feet moving toward the kitchen. The child appeared in the doorway, confusion written across her features. "Who's the fancy man talking to Daddy?" she whispered, instinctively lowering her voice in response to the tension radiating through the house. Elena knelt to Emma's level, offering what she hoped was a reassuring smile. "Someone your father used to know. Why don't you finish your song? It was sounding beautiful." But Emma shook her head, moving closer to Elena with the intuitive understanding children possessed about when adults needed protection. "Daddy gets upset when people talk about before Mommy died," she said quietly. "He thinks I don't notice, but his voice changes. Like it's changing now." From the living room, Pemberton's voice rose with academic enthusiasm. "Harvard is prepared to offer you a full research position, Marcus. Your daughter could attend the finest private schools, the life Sarah would have wanted for both of you." Elena felt Emma stiffen beside her, the child's small hand finding hers with desperate intensity. "Daddy already gives me the best life," Emma whispered fiercely. "We don't need fancy schools. We have our house and our stories and our Saturday pancakes." Marcus's response was quiet, but firm, carrying the weight of a decision made long ago and reaffirmed daily through small acts of love. "Richard, I appreciate the offer, but my answer hasn't changed. My life is here now. Emma's life is here. We've built something good in Millbrook, something Sarah would be proud of." Elena heard Pemberton's frustrated sigh, the sound of a man unaccustomed to having his generosity rejected. "You're wasting your intellectual gifts, Marcus. Hiding in this provincial town, pretending to be satisfied with manual labor. It's beneath you." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena felt anger rise in her chest, not for herself, but for the man who had shown her that true intelligence wore work boots and flannel shirts, who read Latin poetry to his daughter and fixed broken locks with equal skill. Emma tugged on her sleeve, dark eyes wide with worry. "Is the fancy man going to make Daddy leave?" The question broke Elena's heart with its innocent terror, the fear of an 8-year-old who had already lost one parent and could not bear to lose the stability her father represented. "No, sweetheart," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Your father makes his own choices, and he chooses you, always." She stood, Emma's hand still clasped in hers, and walked toward the living room where two very different visions of success faced each other across an unbridgeable divide. It was time to stop hiding in the kitchen and stand with the man who had taught her that courage sometimes looked like changing a diaper at 3 a.m. or reading the same bedtime story for the 100th time. Pemberton looked up as Elena entered the room, his sharp eyes taking in her casual clothes and the child clinging to her side. "Ah, Dr. Martinez," he said with practiced charm. "I was hoping to meet the colleague who has inspired Marcus to return to serious academic work." But his tone carried subtle dismissal, the implication that Elena was somehow responsible for leading his protégé astray. Marcus stood near the fireplace, his posture rigid with controlled tension, caught between the world he had left and the life he had chosen. Dr. Pemberton, Elena replied coolly. Marcus hasn't returned to academic work. He never left it. He simply found a more honest way to pursue it. She felt Emma's grip tighten on her hand, drawing strength from the connection. Some of us believe that intelligence isn't diminished by choosing love over ambition, that the most profound scholarship comes from understanding life beyond university walls. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had learned hard lessons about what truly mattered. Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly, recognizing a worthy opponent despite his preconceptions. "How philosophical," he said with faint condescension. "But surely you understand the waste of keeping such talent buried in custodial work. Marcus could be shaping young minds at Harvard, publishing groundbreaking research, contributing to human knowledge on a grand scale." He gestured toward Emma with casual dismissal. Children are adaptable. She would thrive in Cambridge's intellectual environment. Emma stepped forward, her chin raised with unconscious mimicry of her father's dignity. "I don't want to adapt," she said clearly, her 8-year-old voice carrying surprising force. "I want to stay here with Daddy and Elena and my friends and my school and my room where Mommy used to read to me." The simple declaration cut through Pemberton's sophisticated arguments like a sword through silk, revealing the human cost of his grand academic visions. Marcus moved to his daughter's side, his hand settling protectively on her shoulder. "There's your answer, Richard," he said quietly. "Emma's happiness matters more than my intellectual legacy. Sarah understood that. I wish you could too." Pemberton studied the tableau before him. The janitor scholar, the disgraced professor, and the fierce child who held them together, with the bewilderment of someone whose world consisted entirely of academic achievements and professional recognition. "Very well," Pemberton said finally, his tone mixing disappointment with resignation. "But the door remains open, Marcus. When you tire of this domestic experiment, Harvard will welcome you home." He gathered his coat with practiced efficiency, preparing to return to a world where worth was measured in publications and prestige. At the door, he paused, looking back with something approaching genuine concern. "Don't let sentiment blind you to opportunity, my boy. Sarah would want the best for both of you." After Pemberton left, the house settled into thoughtful silence. Emma curled up on the couch between Marcus and Elena, her head on her father's lap while her feet found Elena's knee with casual intimacy. "Is that man right?" she asked quietly. "Would Mommy want us to move to Harvard?" Marcus stroked his daughter's hair with infinite tenderness, his eyes distant with memory and love. "Mommy wanted us to be happy," he said simply. "She wanted us to choose people over positions, love over luxury. I think she'd be proud of the life we've built." Elena watched father and daughter together, struck by the profound bond that had sustained them through loss and uncertainty. She thought about her own journey, from the ambitious graduate student who had measured worth in degrees and publications, to the woman who now found meaning in Saturday morning pancakes and 8-year-old wisdom. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I think your mother would be very proud of both of you." As winter melted into spring, their collaboration produced a paper that challenged fundamental assumptions about who deserved access to classical education. Democratizing Antiquity, Classical Studies Beyond the Academy argued that ancient wisdom belonged to anyone willing to engage with it, regardless of formal credentials or institutional affiliation. Marcus's perspective as someone who had chosen family over faculty positions brought authenticity to arguments that might otherwise seem merely theoretical. The paper was accepted by the Journal of Classical Education with enthusiastic reviews, lauding its fresh perspective on accessibility and inclusion in humanities scholarship. Elena felt pride swell in her chest as she read the acceptance letter aloud at Marcus's kitchen table, Emma cheering from her homework corner as if she understood the magnitude of their achievement. "Does this mean you're famous now?" Emma asked, bouncing with excitement. "Will they put your picture in magazines?" Marcus laughed, pulling his daughter into a hug that lifted her feet from the floor. "It means we helped people understand something important," he said, spinning her around the kitchen. "That learning belongs to everyone, not just fancy universities." Elena watched them celebrate with heart-swelling joy, thinking about how far they had all traveled from that morning in the faculty lounge, when assumptions and prejudices had nearly prevented this friendship from blooming. Their success brought unexpected attention from education reformers and classical studies programs seeking to broaden their appeal. Interview requests arrived weekly, conference invitations filled their email inboxes, and prestigious journals solicited follow-up articles. But Marcus approached fame with the same steady calm he brought to everything else, accepting opportunities that aligned with their mission while protecting the family time that remained his first priority. "We're making a difference," Elena said one evening, as they reviewed speaking invitations over coffee and Emma's leftover pizza. "Schools are implementing accessibility programs based on our recommendations. Community colleges are adding classical studies courses. We're actually changing how people think about education." Marcus nodded, pleasure evident in his quiet smile. "Sarah would have loved this," he said softly. "She always believed knowledge should be shared, not hoarded." The mention of his late wife no longer brought the sharp pain it once had, Elena noticed. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had transformed into something gentler, a presence rather than an absence, love that continued to guide choices and shape dreams. Elena had learned not to feel threatened by Sarah's memory, understanding instead that she was being invited to join a story rather than replace its previous chapters. On a warm Saturday evening in late spring, as they finished editing their second paper while Emma played in the backyard, Marcus set down his laptop and looked at Elena with an expression she could not quite read. "I have something for you," he said quietly, disappearing into his bedroom. He returned carrying the leather briefcase Elena had glimpsed in his closet months earlier, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Inside lay the unfinished dissertation that had haunted his dreams for 7 years, hundreds of pages of meticulous research on Virgilian prophecy and American identity, abandoned when Sarah's illness demanded his complete attention. "I want you to have this," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "not to publish under your name, but to finish the work, to say what I couldn't find the strength to say." Elena's hands trembled as she touched the manuscript, understanding the magnitude of the gift he was offering. "Marcus, I can't. This is your life's work," she protested, but he was already shaking his head. "My life's work is in the backyard, climbing that maple tree and planning her summer reading list," he said with gentle firmness. "This research deserves to see the light. You understand it as well as I do now, maybe better." He paused, watching Elena's face with quiet intensity. "Besides, the best scholarship happens in collaboration. We've proven that." Elena looked down at the dissertation, 7 years of brilliant analysis waiting for completion, insights that could reshape how scholars understood the intersection of classical literature and American identity. But more than that, she saw trust made tangible, friendship transformed into intellectual partnership, love expressed through shared purpose. "We'll finish it together," she said finally. "Equal partners, equal credit. Your vision, our voices." Emma's laughter drifted through the open windows as she discovered a family of robins nesting in the maple tree, her excited voice calling for them to come see the baby birds. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances across the table, understanding without words that they were witnessing another beginning, not just of academic collaboration, but of something deeper and more lasting than either had dared to hope. That night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with stories of brave scholars and magical languages, Elena and Marcus sat on the front porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The briefcase lay between them on the wooden steps, no longer a repository of abandoned dreams, but a bridge to shared possibilities. "What happens now?" Elena asked softly, meaning more than just their research projects. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his face peaceful in the golden porch light. "Now we keep building," he said simply. "The work, the friendship, whatever comes next. Sarah used to say that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up day after day, choosing each other again and again." He looked at Elena with eyes that held no promises but infinite possibility. "I'd like to keep showing up if you'll have us." Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the ambitious professor who measured worth in publications to the woman who found joy in bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes. "I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be," she said honestly, reaching for his hand as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, The house glowed with warm light, Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator and classical texts, sharing space with children's books on every shelf. 6 months later, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the National Education Association's annual conference, her voice steady as she delivered the keynote address that had grown from their collaborative research. "Education is not a privilege to be rationed," she said, looking out at hundreds of teachers and administrators from across the country. "It is a birthright to be celebrated. When we limit access to knowledge based on socioeconomic status or institutional affiliation, we impoverish not just individuals, but our entire society." In the audience, Marcus sat with Emma beside him, both wearing their finest clothes for Elena's moment of triumph. Emma had insisted on bringing her notebook to take important notes about the speech, though most of her attention was focused on the elaborate decorations in the hotel ballroom. Marcus watched Elena command the stage with quiet pride, remembering the woman who had swept into that faculty lounge with designer heels and unexamined assumptions about worth and intelligence. "The janitor in my story," Elena continued, her voice carrying to the back of the auditorium, "taught me that brilliance wears many uniforms. Sometimes it mops floors at dawn and reads Virgil by lamplight. Sometimes it sacrifices career advancement for bedtime stories and soccer practice. Sometimes it finds profound truth in the space between what we expect and what we discover when we look beyond surface assumptions." The applause was thunderous, sustained, filled with recognition and validation from educators who had seen their own battles to expand access and inclusion. Elena accepted the standing ovation with grace, but her eyes found Marcus and Emma in the crowd, drawing strength from their presence. This moment belonged to all of them: the scholar who had never stopped learning, the father who had never stopped loving, and the child who reminded them daily that the most important lessons could not be found in textbooks. Later that evening, as they celebrated at a quiet restaurant near their hotel, Emma raised her glass of apple juice in a solemn toast. "To Daddy for being the smartest janitor in the world, and to Elena for seeing what nobody else could see." The adults laughed, clinking their wine glasses against her juice with ceremonial seriousness. But beneath the humor lay profound truth. They had found each other across assumptions and expectations, building something beautiful from broken dreams and second chances. The leather briefcase now sat in Elena's home office, transformed from a repository of regret into a symbol of collaborative possibility. Their joint dissertation was scheduled for publication the following spring, already generating interest from university presses and classical studies programs. But more important than professional success was the family they had become, not through blood or law, but through daily choices to see beyond surfaces, to value hearts over credentials, to believe that love could take as many forms as there were people brave enough to embrace its challenges. Marcus still worked as Millbrook High's janitor, but now his evenings were filled with guest lectures at the community college and mentoring sessions with first-generation college students. Elena had been offered a full professorship at 3 prestigious universities, but she had chosen to stay in Millbrook, teaching part-time and focusing on research that mattered more than research that impressed. Emma continued to be their bridge between worlds, the child who spoke multiple languages and helped immigrants feel welcome, who understood that intelligence came in many forms and that kindness was the most important curriculum of all. On quiet Sunday mornings, they could be found at Marcus's kitchen table, Elena grading papers while Marcus prepared lesson plans for his evening classes, Emma working on stories about princesses who spoke to animals in their native tongues. The ordinariness of these moments held extraordinary beauty, proving that the most profound transformations often happened not in dramatic revelations, but in the accumulated weight of small daily choices to see and be seen, to value and be valued, to love and be loved exactly as they were. As autumn returned to Millbrook, painting the maple trees in shades of gold and crimson, Elena reflected on the year that had changed everything. The woman who had once measured worth in designer labels and academic credentials now found her greatest joy in Emma's laughter and Marcus's quiet wisdom. She had learned that some of life's most important teachers wore janitors' uniforms, and some of its most profound lessons were written in the margins of abandoned dissertations and the spaces between what people appeared to be and who they actually were. The leather briefcase remained on Elena's desk, no longer filled with regret but with possibility. New research projects, collaborative dreams, and the ongoing story of three people who had found in each other what they had not even known they were looking for. Outside her window, Emma's voice drifted up from the backyard where she was teaching the neighbor children to write their names in Greek letters, passing on the gifts her father had given her with the generous spirit of someone who understood that knowledge, like love, multiplied when shared. In the end, it had not been about translation at all, not Latin manuscripts or academic credentials or proving intellectual worth to skeptical colleagues. It had been about recognition, about seeing past uniforms and assumptions to the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Marcus had never needed to translate ancient texts to prove his brilliance. He had been demonstrating it every day through the way he loved his daughter, pursued truth for its own sake, and chose integrity over advancement. Elena had simply been fortunate enough to learn the language of seeing, to understand that the most important discoveries happened not in dusty archives, but in kitchen conversations and bedtime stories and the daily miracle of choosing each other again and again. The story that had begun with mocking laughter and cruel challenges had transformed into something approaching grace, proof that sometimes the most profound journeys started with the willingness to admit you had been wrong, to see beyond first impressions, and to believe that love came in as many forms as there were people brave enough to embrace its infinite, surprising possibilities.